pulses and temperatures and blood pressures were seething in his mind, and sharp sticks and jagged stones, and the general possibilities of a puncture, and murmurs of the heart, and rallies of the lungs, and a most unaccountable knock, knock, knocking in the engine, and the probable relation of middle ear disease, and the perfectly positive symptoms of optic neuritis, and a damned funny squeak in the steering gear. "Father?" the little girl persisted valiantly. To add to his original concentration, the senior surgeon's linen collar began to chafe him maddeningly under his chin. The annoyance added 2 scowls to his already blackly furrowed face, and at least 10 miles an hour to his running time, but nothing whatsoever to his conversational ability. "Father?" the little girl whimpered with faltering courage. Then, panic-stricken, as wiser people have been before her, over the dreadful spookish remoteness of a perfectly normal human being who refuses either to answer or even to notice your wildest efforts at communication, she raised her waspish voice in its shrillest, harshest war-cry. "Fat father! Fat father! Fat father!" she screeched out frenziedly at the top of her lungs. The gunshot agony of a wounded rabbit was in the cry, the last gurgling gasp of strangulation under a murderer's reeking fingers, catastrophe unspeakable, disaster now irrevocable. Clamping down his brakes with a wrench that almost tore the insides out of his engine, the senior surgeon brought the great car to a staggering standstill. "What is it?" he cried, in real terror. "What is it?" Limply the little girl stretched down from the white linen nurse's lap, till she could nick her toe against the shiniest woodwork in sight. Altogether aimlessly, her small chin began to burrow deeper and deeper into her big fur collar. "For heaven's sake, what do you want?" demanded the senior surgeon. Even yet along his spine the little nerves crinkled with shock and apprehension. "For heaven's sake, what do you want?" Helplessly the child lifted her turbid eyes to his. With unmistakable appeal her tiny hand went clutching out at one of the big buttons on his coat. Desperately, for an instant, she rummaged through her brain for some remotely adequate answer to this most thunderous question, and then retreated precipitously as usual to the sacristy of her own imagination. "All the birds were there, father," she confided guilelessly. "All the birds were there, with yellow feathers instead of hair, and bumblebees crocheted on the trees, and—" Short of complete annihilation, there was no satisfying vengeance whatsoever that the senior surgeon's exploding passion could wreak upon his offspring. Complete annihilation being unfeasible at the moment, he merely climbed laboriously out of the car, recranked the engine, climbed laboriously back into his place, and started on his way once more. All the red blustering rage was stripped completely from him. Startlingly rigid, startlingly white, his face was like the death mask of a pirate. Pleasantly excited by she didn't know exactly what, the little girl resumed her beloved falsetto chant, rhythmically all the while with her puny iron-braced legs beating the tune into the white linen nurse's tender flesh. "All the birds were there, with yellow feathers instead of hair, and bumblebees crocheted on the trees, and all the birds were there, with yellow feathers instead of hair, and—" Frenziedly, as a runaway horse trying to escape from its own pursuing harness and carriage, the senior surgeon poured increasing speed into both his own pace and the pace of his tormentor. Up hill, down dale, screeching through rocky echoes, swishing through blue-green spruce lands, dodging indomitable boulders, grazing lacks, treacherous embankments, the great car scuttled homeward. Huddled behind his steering wheel like a warrior behind his shield, every body muscle taut with strain, every facial muscle diabolically calm, the senior surgeon met and parried successively each fresh onslaught of yard, rod, mile. Then suddenly, in the first precipitous descent of a mighty hill, the whole earth seemed to drop out from under the car. Down, 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 with incredible swiftness and smoothness, the great machine went diving towards abysmal space. Up, 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 with incredible bumps and bouncings, trees, bushes, stone walls went rushing to the sky. Gasping surprisedly towards the senior surgeon, the white linen nurse saw his grim mouth yank round abruptly in her direction, as it yanked sometimes in the operating room with some sharp incisive order of life or death. Instinctively she leaned forward for the message. Not over loud, but strangely distinct, the words slapped back into her straining ears. "If it will rest your face any to look scared, by all means do so. I've lost control of the machine," called the senior surgeon sardonically across the roar of the wind. The phrase excited the white linen nurse, but it did not remotely frighten her. She was not in the habit of seeing the senior surgeon lose control of any situation. Merely intoxicated with speed, delirious with ozone, she snatched up the little girl close to her breast. "We're flying!" she cried. "We're dropping from a parachute! We're—" Swoopingly, like a sled striking glare, level ice, the great car swerved from the bottom of the hill into a soft rolling meadow. Instantly, from every conceivable direction, like foes in ambush, trees, stumps, rocks reared up in threatening defiance. Tighter and tighter the white linen nurse crushed the little girl to her breast. Louder and louder she called in the little girl's ear. "Scream!" she shouted. "There might be a bump! Scream louder than a bump! Scream! Scream! Scream!" In that first overwhelming, nerve-numbing, heart-crunching terror of his whole life as the great car tilted up against a stone, ploughed down into the mushy edge of a marsh, and skidded completely round, crash bang, into a tree, it was the last sound that the senior surgeon heard. The sound of a woman and child screeching their lungs out in diabolical exultancy. End of chapter 4.